Your presence here today. We had another important caucus discussion earlier today where we were briefed by Representative Adam Schiff on legislation that we expect to vote on in the next day or two that relates to the effort to defend our democracy. And of course, we continue to try to work to deliver real results for the American people, solve the challenges that are in front of us as we continue to do, making sure that we avoid a default on our debt, protect the full faith and credit of the United States of America, ensure that we've got a robust defense infrastructure in place to protect the safety and well-being of the American people, and continue to support President Biden's efforts to crush the virus, to make sure that we're providing real relief to the American people who have been struggling through this pandemic, and also to deliver millions of good-paying jobs to everyday Americans, cut taxes as we did with the child tax credit, and will continue to do through the Build Back Better Act, and perhaps most importantly at this moment, to lower costs for everyday Americans. The Build Back Better Act will lower child care costs. It will lower health care costs. It will lower the cost of housing. It will lower higher education costs. And it's going to lower the high costs of life-saving prescription drugs, including, but not limited to, insulin. Democrats deliver for the people, making life better for working families, middle-class folks, senior citizens, low-income families, young people, veterans, the poor, the sick, the afflicted, the least, the lost, and the left behind. Democrats deliver for everyday Americans. And it would be a nice thing if we actually had partners in government willing to work with us on the challenges facing the American people. But we do not. It's not hyperbole. It's not rhetoric. It's not spin. It's what the other side is telling us. They are telling us who they are. Marjorie Taylor Greene was very clear for all of the world to hear. She said, we all need to hear this. So we're helping her out in that regard. We conservatives in the House GOP aren't the fringe. We're not the fringe. Oh, that's interesting. We actually represent the base of Republican voters, approximately 70%. And when the party, presumably Kevin McCarthy and company, learn to represent conservative Americans, we will never lose again. They are the base. Now, if we thought that Marjorie Taylor Greene was an outlier, this week we hear from Matt Gaetz. It's very clear what the American people can expect if things go the way that Matt Gaetz apparently believes they're going to go. He says, when we're going to take power after the next election, and when we do, it's not going to be the days of Paul Ryan and Trey Gowdy, two people that I can agree to disagree with on a variety of issues, but have a lot of respect for in the contest of ideas. And certainly my friend Trey Gowdy is no shrinking violet. Served with him on the Judiciary Committee. A worthy opponent, the two of them. And he says it's going to be the days of Jim Jordan, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Dr. Gosar, and myself. What a group. What a group. The base of the Republican Party. Conspiracy theorists, QAnon supporters, and wannabe authoritarian sympathizers intent on destroying our democracy. In their words, not ours. And so we're going to continue to keep the focus on delivering for the American people, but this is frightening stuff. With an Omicron variant that we're trying to crush, inflationary issues that we're trying to deal with connected to the pandemic and supply chain dynamics, and of course the defense of our democracy. And this is what we're hearing from the leaders of the House Republican Conference. And I yield to my good friend, Pete Aguilar.
Thank you, Professor Jeffries. This is shocking stuff, and to see what our colleagues here are saying is just deeply troubling. But as the chairman mentioned, we're focused on the agenda at hand. Last week, we passed a continuing resolution to fund government through February. This week, we passed the National Defense Authorization Act to protect our men and women in uniform, to make sure that they have the resources to continue to do the job. We passed legislation to protect Medicare and working with the Senate to come up with a deal to prevent what would be a catastrophic debt default. For 4 years, the former president's reckless policies added nearly $8 trillion to the national debt with nothing to show for it. The U.S. has never defaulted on our debt, and we won't start now. As always, House Democrats are focused on working for the people, while our colleagues on the other side threaten violence and spew racist rhetoric at our members. And as we've said before, these halls don't always feel safe for members. And this season, as this year comes to an end, it's important to reflect that the GOP leader needs to step up, hold his members accountable, and ensure that we can all do the work that we need to do. While agreeing to disagree occasionally, it's important that we have the space to make those decisions and that members feel comfortable doing the job that we need to do. With that, we'll answer some questions.
Two quick questions. First on the smash and grabs. We had Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who recently got some pushback on some comments she made about doubting whether these were happening or not. The White House says that they are sending additional support from the FBI. What's leadership's position, and what can Congress do to help some of these cities out?
Well, I don't want to comment on what leadership's position is. Everyone can speak for themselves. I think people have been very clear in their support of the White House. The White House's efforts in this regard. Certainly, President Biden has been very clear that he's going to provide all the help that any cities, jurisdictions, or municipalities may need in dealing with any outbreaks of property crimes or violence or anything that threatens the health, the safety, and well-being of the American people. And I stand with the administration in that regard.
And then will leadership move to strip Representative Hobart of her committee?
Yeah, I didn't get an opportunity to attend the leadership meeting yesterday because I was at the funeral for the late Carrie Meek. But it is my expectation that Lauren Boebert is going to be held accountable. As Vice Chair Aguilar mentioned, it would be a constructive thing if my friends on the other side of the aisle would handle their own business in terms of the out-of-control members. But we haven't seen that level of accountability so far. At some point, I think the House as a whole is going to have to act.
I have a question for Congressman Aguilar. On the January 6th committee, we've got news this morning that you guys are going to move forward on a contempt referral for Meadows. Are you concerned that the more that these things go to court, you're pushing the timeline back? I mean, Bannon's not going to be in court till July, Meadows presumably after that. And do you see it as a similar time stalling measure for all the folks who are coming forward saying, I'm going to plead the fifth?
Well, I think if we weren't receiving information that is helpful to the investigation, then that could be a speed bump. But we continue to gather information each and every day, over 270 interviews that we've conducted We continue to glean information from witnesses each and every day and to connect the investigative dots that are necessary. Clearly, as you mentioned, if Mr. Bannon wants to potentially go to jail for 2 years as a result of not talking to us, then that's something he's going to have to answer to. I would love if it was in a more expedited manner, as would my colleagues, but that's the path he's chosen. But I will say, for every individual, it's a small group of individuals who are stonewalling the investigation that we're having, and for every one of them, there's dozens more who are talking to us, and there continues to be data and information that we gather that helps our investigative needs. And I'd just refer you to the chairman's letter to Mr. Meadows' attorney that became public this morning that talks about some of that information that we've already received from Mr. Meadows himself in part of the 6,000 documents that we've seen.
And on the pleading the fifth tactic, is that stalling, or do you think these people are acting in good faith?
We have deep reverence for the Fifth Amendment, and want to make sure that we're proceeding cautiously when someone does that, when someone invokes the Fifth Amendment. So we don't take that lightly at all. So that's part of the discussion, and that will be part of potentially, an interview that someone has with us. If they choose to invoke their Fifth Amendment right, then that's something that would be for the record. But that doesn't mean that they can't come before the committee. There is no blanket privilege, and there is no blanket fifth. So if they want to handle it on a question-by-question basis, that's something that the committee is willing to have a conversation about, but that shouldn't forestall our efforts.
Second row.
On the child tax credit, do you think the House should proactively renew the CTC in case the Senate doesn't pass the Build Back Better Act before the end of the year and those benefits expire?
Yeah, it's my expectation that the Senate is going to act and get the Build Back Better Act over the finish line prior to the end of the year. Majority Leader Schumer recently reiterated that commitment. One of the reasons why it's important is because of the pending expiration of the child tax credit, which has been a lifeline for so many different American families, low-income families, working families, and middle-class families, helping to provide families in America at a time when we are seeing some inflationary pressures to pay for child care expenses or educational expenses or food or housing expenses. That's a Democratic initiative that we support, that has been important and critical, and that we are determined to make sure continues.
Follow up on that, though, is there a plan if Build Back Better doesn't get signed into law by the time that this current one expires, and could that become a political problem for you guys, given how much you've touted the expansion of this credit as one of the ways that you are doing things for, voters?
Yeah, I'll yield to Pete as well on this question. Has played an important role as an appropriator in this space. And of course, we're all thankful for the leadership of Chairwoman Rosa DeLauro. And I don't think that Chairwoman DeLauro is going to allow this tax credit to expire. And House Democrats will not allow this tax credit to expire. And I don't believe that the Senate will either. President Biden, when he came to visit us, was very clear in what he outlined in the House Build Back Better Act that had support in the Senate. And amongst the many things that he laid out, of course, the child tax credit was right at the top of the list. It's my expectation that this is going to get done and that the Build Back Better Act is going to get done. Yeah, go back to this side, and then we'll go back to the other side. Yeah.
Going back to Boebert being held accountable for her remarks, the Democrats moved very swiftly to punish Representative Gosar. Why the hesitancy now to move swiftly to hold accountable Representative Boebert in this respect? It seems like you guys are kind of like being a little bit hesitant on this.
Yeah, I don't believe that there's any hesitancy. There are active discussions about the appropriate way to proceed. And I think you are now seeing at least some rank and file House Republicans including most recently Representative Crenshaw, indicate that this is a toxic circus that is going on the other side of the aisle, and something needs to be done about it. Hopefully, the House Republican leadership will come to that conclusion as well. But there is no hesitancy on our side. We've held members accountable in the past. We think that it is the House's collective responsibility to act. Democrats continue to be prepared to do that. It's unclear what's happening on the other side of the aisle with leadership.
In Democratic leadership to strip her of her committees swiftly.
Yeah, I don't want to get out ahead of any ongoing discussions in terms of what accountability may ultimately look like, but there are active discussions underway.
Yesterday, Republicans did release a report on the jail conditions for rioters. I was wondering if you think Democrats on the January 6th committee should visit the jail as part of the investigation.
The Department of Justice is the entity who that question should be sent to, and we trust that they are carrying out their duties and responsibilities to uphold the rule of law. There have been a number of criminal prosecutions. We are focused on the events and circumstances that led up to and caused January 6th, and so that continues to be our focus, our mission, and our legislative mandate that was passed within House Resolution 503. So that's the focus of our legislative efforts. That's what we had bipartisan support for, and that's what we continue to implement.
Yeah, and it's just kind of, I'll go to you next, but it's kind of extraordinary that we are in the midst of working to create millions of good paying jobs for everyday Americans. We are cutting taxes for working families, and we're lowering costs in a variety of areas, including child care, health care, and the high cost of life-saving prescription drugs. And the most prominent voices within the House Republican Conference are concerned about coddling insurrectionists. Now, I've been involved in prison reform efforts, and I support the notion that, one, people are innocent until proven guilty, and that jail conditions shouldn't be punitive at all. But it's not clear to me that this is a serious effort.
Yeah, I had a question on the NDAA, and Republicans are basically saying it's great to work with them on be able to pass this National Defense Authorization Act, but they're claiming that Democrats and Speaker Pelosi are not working with them to deal with inflation, to deal with more higher gas prices. Your reaction to that?
Well, and I'll yield to Pete on this as well. President Biden has taken decisive action in terms of the strategic oil reserve release that is designed to ease some of the gas price pressures that the American people are experiencing. There are also geopolitical issues and challenges related to the Gulf states that I believe the Biden administration is trying to deal with in order to address gas prices. We don't have support from our colleagues on the other side of the aisle in terms of any serious proposals, because they're focused on lecturing us, as Marjorie Taylor Greene did, on what the Republican base actually is, and spiking the football 12 months before a midterm election, telling us basically to expect nothing but investigations and subpoenas, and in all likelihood, the impeachment of someone from the Biden administration without any reasonable basis or cause. This is what the Republicans are telling us. That's their governing strategy and philosophy. They're not seriously trying to deal with the cost pressures that the American people are experiencing, because if they were, then they'd come forward with some ideas and work with us in terms of the Build Back Better Act. They are not.
All I would add is, within NDAA, Alyssa Slotkin authored some bipartisan amendments related to the supply chain as well. So even in the legislation that we are passing, we continue to address issues of importance to members. Clearly, the military has a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge of the supply chain issues, and so imparting some of that on the broader economy is something that that the House Armed Services Committee wanted to convey and did that in a bipartisan way.
Thank you, Chairman. Back to the January 6th committee, we heard that the criminal referrals were meant in part to deter others from stonewalling. Just, given the fact that after Steve Bannon, you've had Jeffries not exactly compliant, and now you have Mark Meadows, does it show that that deterrence part is not actually working?
No, I'd reject that completely. We've heard from a number of the attorneys of individuals who we have spoken to. Clearly, we've heard from some counsel that have said specifically, my client is not Steve Bannon. And so, we know that this is something that individuals don't take lightly, and clearly their counsel doesn't take it lightly. Like I said, over 270 witnesses who have come forward, and we continue to gather information. It is an incredibly small number of individuals who have indicated they're going to claim privilege or otherwise stonewall our efforts, and they will have consequences to those actions. But we continue to gather information, as evidenced by the chairman's letter to Mr. Meadows' attorney that was released this morning.
Any final questions?
Yeah, also yesterday, the Republicans were saying that the term insurrection, you're calling the January 6th rioters insurrections, is simply incorrect because no one has been charged with insurrection or sedition. What's your response to that?
Well, I think, the House is on record in a bipartisan way as a result of the impeachment of former President Trump the second time that the President of the United States engaged in inciting a violent insurrection that we all saw with our own eyes, the storming of the Capitol, an assault on police officers, resulting in more than 140 being seriously injured, and subsequently some loss of life amongst officers. And it was an effort on January 6th to halt the peaceful transfer of power. To me, that's an insurrection. Now, if my Republican colleagues want to spend their time not dealing with inflation, not dealing with COVID, not dealing with the effort to create millions of good-paying jobs, then that's on them. And the choice between what Democrats are all about in delivering with a party of opportunity and what Republicans are all about, they are the party of Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, Dr. Gosar, and Lauren Boebert. I'll take that contrast any day. Thank you, everyone.